Welcome to the Full Nielsen. Today I'm going to be reviewing this Tippmann Arms M422. This is the Elite model. I believe the difference between the Elite and the Pro model is that the Elite model has an aluminum M-LOK forend, whereas the Pro model has polymer. You'll have to double check on that. That's just what I had read online. But anyway, if you do not own a firearm to protect yourself, I don't recommend this as a self-protection firearm. I recommend this as a training tool. If you don't own any firearms to protect yourself, go out and get a Smith & Wesson M&P Sport 2 or any type of AR-15 that has a reputation for being reliable. Mount a weapon light to the thing and an inexpensive optic like a Romeo 5. Buy some boxes of ammunition and go learn the basics of how to operate it. And then you'll have something to protect yourself. Now, training is very important, and if you're like me and you already own lots of different firearms and lots of different ARs that are more than capable of being adequate for self-protection, this firearm has a different appeal. And where this firearm has a great appeal, in my opinion, as I already mentioned, is as a training tool. Ammunition being as expensive it is, you can go out and shoot 500 rounds or 1,000 rounds in a training session with this firearm, and you're only going to be spending anywhere from less than that, $35 to $45 for 500 rounds of 22, so $70 to $90 or so to go out and shoot a day, or shoot 1,000 rounds with a firearm like this. Now, what things can you practice on this that will be similar to your AR-15? Well, this firearm operates unlike some of the old ones that they made to look like an AR-15, but they didn't really operate the same way as an AR-15. This M422 is the closest 22 in terms of size and weight and feel and battery of arms of any AR-15 22 I've used. And so it mimics all of those functions virtually identically. There's a few little things like the charging handle, obviously for a 22, is not going to pull back nearly as far as what it would be for a 5.56. But other than that, it operates the same way. The sights are the same. The magazines feel the same. The weight of the gun feels the same. So you can practice your target transitions, your trigger control, your reloads. All of the battery of arms related to this platform will directly translate over to you being able to proficiently operate your AR-15. There are a few limitations and some things to be aware of with that, and those are recoil management. You're going to get 95 or 90% of what you need out of this firearm as a training tool. However, 22 has significantly less recoil than 5.56. 5.56 doesn't have a lot of recoil, and if you're using a muzzle brake or a suppressor or flash hider or whatever, flash hider obviously going to have more recoil than a muzzle brake. There are muzzle brakes that will make your AR shoot with about the same level of recoil as what this 22 has. My Lantac Dragon brake is that way, but that's really noisy brakes. Some people hate them. Anyway, but the recoil mitigation part is going to be something that you're going to have to get used to on the real deal. And this is not going to provide you with that. The other thing that this is not going to provide you with is the range of what a high-powered rifle, like a 5.56 chambered AR-15, is going to give you. I would not recommend somebody practice with this as a training tool, as a replacement for an AR-15 beyond 100 yards. And the reason for that is because I have found that if I zero this properly, I can shoot and hit my target no problem at point blank out to 100 yards with no need to hold over the target on a standard silhouette size target. Now, if you go beyond 100 yards, you're going to have to start aiming over the target, or depending on how you zero your rifle, you're going to have to aim over your target. That's a pretty significant training scar, and it's something that I found as a young man going from shooting 22s my whole life and getting used to shooting at birds and things that were quite a ways away, and you had to hold over the bird. Well, then you take a high-powered rifle deer hunting, and if you don't understand how significant of a difference there is, you think that you need, oh yeah, it's about that far. Well, I'd be holding over about this much with my 22. And if you haven't practiced enough with a high-powered rifle, then you're shooting over everything you shoot at because you think that that gun is going to shoot similar to what a 22 is, and it's not. So I would recommend using this at an appropriate distance to where you're not developing a training scar of aiming over your target at really close ranges. That's not going to translate well for operating an AR-15, which you should be holding point of aim, point of impact pretty much depending on your zero out to about 300 yards. So anyway, so that's what I think the limitations of some of this thing, Now, in terms of performance, I had read that these are pretty reliable and they're pretty accurate. Accuracy-wise, I've never mounted a scope to this to really check out just how accurate they can be. I may do that in the future. But with my red dot, it shoots plenty accurate for anything I would be using it for as a training tool. So no issues there. Reliability-wise, this has been one of the most surprising things about this firearm for me is just how reliable it has been. I've run Federal Auto Match through it, Aguila 38 grain Super Extra, Aguila 40 grain Round Nose Super Extra. I think we've run some standard CCI, some subsonic stuff, a few different rounds through it, and I think there are some really light subsonic loads that would not cycle in this. I think even suppressed. I want to say some of those wouldn't cycle. But all of your standard run-of-the-mill 22 bulk ammunition I put in this thing has run no problem. I've probably run approximately 2,500 rounds through this rifle, and of those 2,500 rounds, I've had maybe 4 or 5 malfunctions in 2,500 rounds. That's a lot of rounds, 22 rimfire, to not be having malfunctions, and I cleaned it probably one time in between there. So if you wanted to say 1,200 rounds and then I cleaned it and then another 1,200 rounds, I think it would have just kept running. I just cleaned it because it seemed to be getting dirty. I was cleaning some of my other guns, so I decided I'd clean it. So I've never run it to the point like I have with other 22s where I can tell you like a Marlin Model 60 that I had as a young man, I have a pretty good idea how many rounds you can get out of that gun before the gun basically just won't run anymore. And you're looking at like maybe 400 to 500 rounds before it's going to be so dirty and fouled up with the way the bolt sits in the chamber in that particular gun that it will you'll start having malfunctions. And I could tell you Browning Buckmark, similar thing of, oh, well, you'll get about X amount of rounds before you're going to start having issues, and then you really need to clean the thing. This gun I have not run it to that point yet. So maybe I will just go out of my way to not clean it and maybe be able to update with some more information about that in the future. But it's been extremely reliable. Now I'm going to show you how this gun takes apart. It's just like your typical AR-15. Push your pin in here. Then this opens. Guess I could have dropped the mag out of the gun. And here's what your bolt carrier group looks like. Okay, and here is your charging handle, and the charging handle is Palmer, and it interfaces with your bolt just like this, okay? So when you put your charging handle in, you don't push it in and up like you do an AR-15, it just goes straight in, and then this interfaces with that groove you could see. And then it all goes in together and snaps back together. Now, as far as the trigger on this firearm, it is just like your standard relatively heavy mil-spec trigger. I was hoping that there would be better aftermarket support trigger-wise. My favorite triggers to run on my AR-15s are Geisley and the LaRue MBT triggers, which I'm switching more and more over to just because they're such great value for money. Neither one of those triggers, at least from what I've read, are compatible with this lower. But there are some other options that are compatible, so you'll just have to do your research and know ahead of time if you want to change the trigger out. Let's say you want to run this as a competitive shooter on some steel challenge matches or something like that. You're probably not going to want this factory mil-spec trigger. But for other guys who are just using it as a training tool at closer ranges, this trigger is serviceable. It may not bother you too much. For me, I haven't decided for sure whether or not I'm going to replace the trigger, but it is just your standard pretty heavy mil-spec trigger. I have done some things to this that it did not come with from the factory. In the buttstock, it comes with just your standard AR-15 type buttstock. I've changed the grip off from the Tippmann Arms one to the Magpul one because I like the storage capability. I always shove usually an optic or an extra battery in there, and then I will shove sometimes some lubrication inside of here, and then they actually include extra parts for this, extractors, springs, all kinds of stuff, and all of that I just jammed into the pistol grip of this. So those are things I like having storage on my rifles for some of those smaller things. It does come with this sling plate here so that you can hook your typical clip-on sling. I already have a bunch of these Midwest Industry QD mounts. They're smaller QD mounts with these Magpul slings, so I just threw what I would run on my typical AR on this rifle. Now I want to get into one of the features that I think is pretty awesome with this. The magazines feel like your typical AR mag. In fact, this is probably heavier than your standard AR mag because of how it's put together. You push this button, comes out, there's another spring-loaded button here that it catches. You pull this little spring down to load it, and you just want to do it bit by bit. I have noticed loading these by hand that it seems like it is very possible to cause yourself a rim lock problem. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's if you take two, and I've got some bullets here, I can probably show you. Your 22 bullets, when you load them into a magazine, really need to be sitting like this as they go down in the magazine. And that's so that this one will feed, and then the next one will feed, and the rims of the cases are not grabbing each other. Rim lock is when you get the top round over the bottom round, and then it goes to feed, and it can't feed, and it's trying to pull basically 2 rounds at once because the rims of the cases are locked together. I've noticed with this that if you're not careful with the way you load it, I don't know if it's a rim lock, I don't know what it is, but that you'll cause some malfunctions that way. This speed loader I'm going to show you that Tippmann Arms makes completely negates that, and I bought it with the gun because I planned on shooting the daylights out of this thing. So I bought 10 mags with it, and I bought a speed loader because, again, my goal with this was lots and lots of practice, lots of training. So here's what the little speed loader looks like. You can find other videos showing how it works. Crank this little handle. Anyway, you put some lubrication on the top of this pad. I'm going to load a magazine for you just so you can kind of get a rough idea of about how long it takes with this speed loader. That's way more than what I need for one magazine, but I'm just going to demonstrate this for you. Okay, so you take this, you shake it. Because the way my camera's set up, I'm going to have to turn it sideways so you can see. As you shake this little hopper, the rounds fall in alignment here. This has a little push button release, just like we're inserting it into a rifle. You insert this thing in there like that. Now obviously I can't crank it in this position because I need gravity to help me load this thing. Don't force it because all these components are plastic, and so you don't want to just snap something off being a goofball. But if you just hold this thing up like this, okay, I'm there. I can tell by the resistance. There's a loaded mag. So awesome. I've got some other speed loaders I'm going to show you guys from some other companies, but the ability to load magazines as fast or faster than you typically shoot them. I mean, if you're doing a mag dump, you can obviously shoot them faster than that, but if you're practicing target transition or moving from cover or things like that, you're not just going to be doing mag dump after mag dump. You can load these magazines faster than what you typically shoot them, which is just awesome. It takes all the tediousness out. So I load like 10 mags before I even go to the range, shoot up to 10 mags when I get there, and then I can load another 10, on the range, and it takes no time at all. I highly recommend this speed loader. It is not cheap. I want to say it's like $80 or $90, but it works very well. As I mentioned, don't force it. If you feel a bunch of resistance, back off and make sure things are feeding in the way they're supposed to, and then keep cranking away. But anyway, it's not cheap, but when you think of it in the terms of, again, training, how much practice can I get in, and how much time does it take me to practice, and it takes a lot of the wasted time out of the equation, I think it's an awesome tool to go along with this platform. So anyway, I'm really impressed with this Tippmann M422. I highly recommend it. I would like to buy the Tippmann Micro Elite, but the ATF's chain keeps moving the goalpost, and so right now those are not coming with a brace on them. They have just a plain smooth buffer tube. That kind of kills the appeal for me at this particular moment in time. But maybe as we watch what happens in the future, hopefully ATF will just completely get decimated in court, or hopefully it will just go away completely. I think that's what we would all really like to see, along with all of the NFA regulations that are in place that are just nonsense. You know, of course it's not safe for me to have an SBR unless I pay the government, and then which case all of a sudden it's magically safe. Yeah, that sounds like a real racket, doesn't it? Anyway, not to get too sidetracked here. Love this rifle. Highly recommend it as a training tool. If you guys have any questions or comments or experience of your own, well, before I conclude this video, I'm going to say one more thing. Lots of guys are going to want to know how this compares to the Smith & Wesson M&P 1522. I have some experience with that platform. They don't compare. This is a much better training tool than the Smith & Wesson is. Now, the Smith & Wesson has its place, and where I think it is a great tool is if you want to teach a young child or somebody to shoot. They are super lightweight, and if you get one of the shorter ones, super lightweight and easy to handle, and it's going to be excellent in that situation. But for an adult to have like a training tool to learn to run an AR-15, this is a way better option. And from what I've seen of it so far, it seems to be much more reliable than what I've typically seen out of Smith & Wesson M&P 1522s. But anyway, that's the last thing I just wanted to throw in there. If you guys have any questions or comments or experience of your own with this type of firearm or other firearms like it that might be a good training tool, feel free to leave a comment section in the comment section below. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.